So some of you have been with us. Were with us on January 1st here in the hall, or have been here maybe for some of the talks during January. Others, this may be brand new. What we've been doing in January is, if you think about like a funnel, the big wide part of the funnel, sort of the broad picture, almost like the zoom lens, or not the zoom, the wide angle lens on a camera. We set our aspirations. On January 1st, a lot of us were in the hall or online, or you may have done it on your own. That's a traditional time. People set their New Year's resolutions. And in this case, we're talking about our spiritual aspirations. How is it in this relatively short life that I have, how do I want to show up? Maybe not as the irritation that I manifest sometimes, the impatience or the frustration or the anxiety. How do I really, in my heart, want to live my life? Perhaps as a person who is kind, compassionate, generous. So we kind of started off with that big picture, and we'll take a moment and just reflect on that. We had a workshop a few days later where people were able to make that a bit more concrete. Like, what does that look like, those aspirations? What are some specific intentions? If you want to be a kinder person, like, who do you want to be kinder to? Maybe the people in your household, maybe people at work. How does that look? So starting to take that kind of wide angle lens and starting to zoom in a little bit more. Like, what are those aspirations? What might they look like in my life? And then Fred was here 2 weeks ago, and he reminded us that we have these aspirations. They're really important. And then there's life. And so often we get thrown off track and we forget our aspirations because life isn't unfolding the way we want sometimes, right? Sometimes things happen that are unpleasant, that are challenging. And so Fred reminded us that, it is up to us to make those aspirations real and to practice and to relate to life in a way that aligns with our aspirations. No matter what's happening, we can be kinder, we can be more understanding. So again, starting to bring that bigger aspiration more into focus in our life, that no matter what's happening, it's up to us to make the change, not to blame it on something external that's happening. We only have control over one thing, and that's the actions of our own body, speech, and mind. So if we want to live in alignment with our aspirations, we need to transform how we relate to things. We're not going to do it by changing everything out there. We probably tried that. It doesn't work very well, right? But we can change how we relate to the world, and we can do it in a way that we can feel at ease. We can have understanding. And it doesn't mean that everything's puppy dogs and roses, right? Sad things still happen. We still experience loss. We still have challenges with difficult people. But instead of kind of this up and down, blaming everything else, we're living in a way that's open, easeful. We're living in what Fred often says is well-being. We may not be happy all the time, but we live in well-being. We have a relationship with life that's at ease, that understands, that's not constantly resisting and pushing back. And then last week, Brian was here, and he's really started moving us to implementation. I like implementation. I'm a Nike gal. Just do it, because we have a lot of good intentions in life, right? How many corporate meetings or work meetings or other things have you sat in and people have like all these goals and objectives, and then there's just not follow through? And we do that too, right? So today, and starting last week, we're moving into the more narrow part of the funnel, or we're zooming in with that camera lens on, okay, how do I make this real? And what Brian really focused on last week, he had Thich Nhat Hanh's calligraphy that says, "This is it." And he reminded us that, the place to become more kind or more patient is not some place in the future. It is right here in the moment when I'm getting irritated, when I'm feeling grouchy. This is the moment. We're only going to change in the present moment. Change happens here. And that's oftentimes where things fall apart, because we get overtaken by our habit energy. We forget our intentions and our aspirations. And then a year later, we're setting intentions again, and we kind of forget what we had the year before. Sometimes we find them and we're like, oh gosh, I kind of forgot about that. So if we really want change, it's in the moment. And Brian said last week, consider your life your field. This is your field. Whatever is in your field right now, if there's irritation in your field right now, here's where you practice. It's right here. It's not in some la-la land in the future. We practice with our life. And so I wanted to take off a little bit more from that field analogy because Thich Nhat Hanh uses that a lot, and it's really, really helpful this morning to talk about how do we cultivate the field? How do we plant what we want to grow that aligns us with our aspirations? What seeds do we water that are wholesome, that will produce loving kindness, compassion, understanding, patience, gratitude, generosity? How do we do that in the moment? Because this is really now where we need to be focusing our practice. And how do we not cultivate whatever you might call a weed? Anger, frustration, impatience, fear, sadness. How do we not water those seeds? So we'll talk about that today. Thich Nhat Hanh said, our mind is a field in which every kind of seed is sown. Seeds of compassion, joy, and hope. Seeds of sorrow, fear, and difficulties. And so oftentimes at Thich Nhat Hanh's retreats, it was wonderful. He would give the same talk. It seemed like at every retreat I ever went to, he had this big white board, they'd roll it out, and I wish he could be here to watch, but he would stand up so mindfully and walk in his robe so slowly over to this board that you felt like your own mindfulness was enhanced just watching him, how he did it. It was just wonderful. And then he would draw this circle, and I don't know, Dee Dee, if you can zoom in a bit, great, on this, and it may be hard to read in the hall, but I'll kind of walk through it. But he'd draw a big circle and say, imagine this is the mind, although the mind really doesn't have a boundary. But this is sort of a conceptualization of the mind. And I can't draw very well. This was supposed to sort of look like an eggplant, not a circle, because oftentimes we do a circle, but really the example is more like the mind's like an eggplant, and that cap at the top that's brown, that smaller part, that's kind of the conscious mind. That's what we're aware of. We're aware of how we feel right now. We're aware of the thoughts we're having. That's sort of the conscious mind. And in this conscious mind is where things from the unconscious mind that we'll talk about bloom as they're watered, and they manifest as flowers or weeds. They manifest as thoughts, beliefs, stories, emotions. We started off as babies. This was all pretty open. And then over time, we started having these seeds planted down here in this unconscious part of the mind. Thich Nhat Hanh called it the storehouse consciousness. All kinds of seeds were planted down here, and just examples of seeds of mindfulness, seed of loving kindness, of understanding, of equanimity, of shame, of fear, of sadness, of anger. We all have the propensities for those seeds to be watered and to come into our conscious mind and to affect our happiness or unhappiness. They can affect our mental state, our speech, our actions. And so it's really important that we understand that I think literally like every moment of the day, whether we know it or not, we're watering seeds. And sometimes it feels benign. I'll just play another game of solitaire. I'll just open the New York Times one more time to look at what's happening with the fires in California. I'll have this thought about a person that's kind of negative. It all matters. And if we want to realize the bigger aspiration of being kinder, more loving, more understanding, What makes that happen or not happen, it's these moments of drip, drip, drip. It's like a drip line on these seeds. Sometimes you're pouring a lot of water on something, but oftentimes with the thoughts, with what we're taking in, what we're watching on TV, what we're reading on the internet, the conversations that we're having, everything that's coming in that we're consuming is watering seeds that are wholesome, seeds that are unwholesome, and sometimes it may be more neutral, but a lot of things are watering these seeds. And then in addition to what we take in, think about like a cow chewing its cud. We're chewing on our thoughts all day long too. So we don't even have to have something new come in. We can just have a thought of, I cannot believe that she said that. And just, I mean, what are we watering? We're not watering understanding. We're not watering loving kindness. We're watering irritation. We're watering me, this feeling of self. So we want to start paying attention, and I want to give some practical examples today of what we're watering. And I like this picture. I think a lot of people can understand, the more you water something, the more it grows in your garden, right? Whether it's a weed or a flower. I think the scientific explanation is kind of helpful for people too who may think, oh, that's just a Buddhist picture. Is that really true? But the scientific counterpart of this is, in the brain, we have synapses. And if I tried to draw them, they kind of look like this. And when you have a thought, an emotion, something happening in the mind, there's a chemical that jumps from here to here that lets that electrical impulse cross of that thought. Oh, they shouldn't have said that. And then I have the thought again, and evolutionarily, our body wanted to make it easier for us. If we repeat something, it must be important to keep us alive, right? So if I keep having the thought, oh, they shouldn't have done that, these synapses actually get closer together to make it easier to have that thought again. So it happens more quickly, more rapidly. So you hear about the brain being wired, or that, thoughts that fire together, wire together. It's nothing permanent, but we are constantly, from a physiological standpoint, making it easier to have either a loving, kind, understanding thought or a fearful thought. So just knowing it does matter what we're watering. It really matters. Nothing is benign. So I'd like to invite you, first of all, just to close your eyes and just take a moment to come back and just bring to mind, what are my spiritual aspirations? And maybe you've set these, maybe you have participated already in this process with us or on your own, or maybe you're just thinking about it for the first time. But stop for a moment just to think about, how is it that I want to show up in life with myself, my relationship with myself, and with other people? What kind of person do I want to be? And this is very much more, instead of a to-do thing, it's a to-be. How could I be today? How is it I want to be as a human being? So just take a moment to think about that. And as you're thinking about that, reflecting, also reflect, if I was to really align my life with this aspiration, to really be this way more and more, what kind of seeds specifically would I want to be watering in my mind? So there's not really any right or wrong way to look at this. There are a lot of beautiful seeds or qualities of mind that we can water that'll help us become wise, compassionate human beings, which is, I think, what most of us want on a spiritual path. You know, we've had some dissatisfaction with trying to make the world give us happiness, with trying to rely on externalities for our well-being. And we want something more stable, an internal well-being, an internal happiness. And so we set these aspirations, and then we practice. And now take a moment to kind of switch gears a bit and think about your typical day. And where does your mind go on your typical day? What does it indulge? What kind of sensory input do you let into the mind? What kind of thoughts do you have swirling around in there? And what kind of seeds might that be watering? And this is not to be self-judgmental. It's just we want to turn on that light of mindfulness and say, wow, I have the ability, each one of us has the ability to create the causes of well-being and happiness in our own minds. What do I want and what am I doing? And that helps give us a clearer path to how we can change. So it's important to be aware of, what am I doing right now? What are the causes of some of the mind states that I may have that aren't conducive to happiness and well-being? So this is something that, this is a quick reflection because, our time together is limited this morning, but this is really important. You think about the things we spend time on in our day. I know in mine, some things are pretty inconsequential, but this is the most important thing, creating this mind of happiness and well-being. So each one of us would really benefit from spending time just reflecting, what is it I want deeply in my heart? And what am I cultivating right now? What seeds am I cultivating? And realizing that it is up to us to water those seeds. And again, in a moment, we'll talk about some specific ways to do that. But it was interesting. I had the good fortune to go down to this island called Dominica with Fred. We were there. We got back on Monday. We were there for a week. And it was just beautiful. It was peaceful, relaxing, the water was clear, there were wonderful fresh tropical fruits available in the markets, people were very kind, and we kind of joked that we were sort of had island mind and island time by the time we left. And then I got back, and it's been a busy week. And just, we sat down and said, island mind can be here all the time. I look around at my little workspace, which is right by the front door of our house next door, and I have my desk, and I have a little candle that I got from my granddaughter. I have a little set of Tibetan flags. I can see flowers outside the window, and I can stop. Every few minutes, I can just stop and relax. That island mind can be here all the time. Again, we think we have to change the environment, but we don't. It's just our mind. So these practices that we can do to water seeds will help you do that. Help us see that we have the ability to relate to every moment the way we want to, that's in line with our aspirations. So there's lots of seeds we could talk about. I thought I'd take a few of the ones I put up there and just give you a few ideas. I'm sure there's so many other ways that you can practice and that you do practice. And we may have time to share some of that. We have the children coming in today at 11:15, so we're a little shorter on time. But first one that we all need to pay attention to is the seed of mindfulness. If the lights aren't on, none of the rest of this matters. If we're stumbling around in the dark and we're running into the furniture because we can't see, it's hard to transform anything else, right? So we really need to strengthen that seed of mindfulness. And even if we've been practicing many years, we may have a lot of intellectual knowledge, we might still bump into the wall. This is about practice. It's really important. So there are a lot of, and mindfulness really is it's remembering where we want to place our attention. Sometimes we want our attention just to be relaxed and open, like when we were hearing the rain this morning. But we want to be clear about where our attention is so it doesn't get swept away by thought and go down a rabbit hole. So how do we train the mind to just sort of stay, to rest and be open? And when it needs to focus on something, it does, but then just kind of come back with a relaxed, open mind. Meditation, obviously, that's really why we're meditating. We're meditating to stabilize the mind so that we can then begin to look deeply at these other seeds and create transformation, to really know who we are. But the first thing we have to do is be able to get that puppy to sit and not just be pulling off all the time. So ways to do that: meditation. For some people who have a hard time sitting still, walking meditation outdoors. And it doesn't have to be very, very slow like we do in the hall, but just sometimes I may be walking down the street and I just say, okay, from here to the next tree on the next block, I'm just going to keep my attention on the experience of my feet touching the earth. And every time I go into a story, start to think about something else, just bring it back, experience the sole of my shoe touching the earth, just in small pieces. We need these little incremental practices, which may not feel like a lot, but again, it's the drip line. We start to practice mindfulness. Brushing our teeth, taking a shower. How often do you get in the shower and you're really kind of unaware of much besides what's in your head? We do a lot of things while we're thinking about something else. So just trying a few simple activities a day is helpful. One thing that people have found to be really impactful here at the center, particularly if you come for a retreat with us, is mindful eating. And I have Jan Chosen-Bays. She's going to be here a week from tomorrow. I'm excited. She'll be with us in the community leading a retreat, and we always bring Chosen and Hogan into the halls to give some talks. But she has these little books she's written. This is Mindful Eating on the Go, but we have all the exercises downstairs where you do things like just between each bite of food, you put your utensil down, maybe even putting the handle out, just with the thought that there are a lot of people who don't have enough to eat. Let me mentally make an offering to them by putting the handle out. Just these mindfulness practices that are so simple that we can do, and then we pick it up when we've done chewing and we eat the food. We all have to eat. So most of us have 3 opportunities a day to practice mindful eating. Even if we're with other people, we can have these short practice periods. She has a lot of other fun stuff in her Mindfulness on the Go book, like use your non-dominant hand for a day. But you have to think and be mindful, just ways of shaking us out of the complacent, I know, I've done this, everything's old type mind state we have to new, fresh. That's what mindfulness brings us. And the grounding and nourishing intensive that I mentioned is really focused on that. So if you're new, and Brian is so wonderful, as a lot of you have been on retreat with him and heard his teachings, he's so wonderful at those teachings. So please consider participating in that. Another seed that I find is really easy to water and has great payback is the seed of gratitude. So take a moment and just close your eyes. Just think of something simple, a person or some condition in your life that you're grateful for. It doesn't have to be anything big, but maybe a small kindness or just an appreciation of good health, whatever. Just something that, when you think about it, you feel gratitude. And just notice if, when you just shift your attention this slight way, if you feel gratitude, how does that feel? How does your mind feel when you do that? And I'll just ask, you can just call it out. How does your mind feel when you shift to gratitude? And open? Happy? Light? And what gratitude does is so often, it's just the human mind just does this, but so often our focus is on ourself and what's wrong. And when we focus on gratitude, we take a moment, all of a sudden our heart opens and we're focused on someone else or another situation. And it's a very heart opening. It just kind of gets us out of that me trap that we're in so often. So a gratitude practice. So oftentimes in the morning, if you're doing meditation, you might just take a moment once you've sat down and you've settled, before you start either focusing on the breath or doing some other practice, just take a moment. It could be 30 seconds to just bring up gratitude for something in your life. And you can do that throughout the day. Some people at the end of the day will do a gratitude journal and write down several things that they're grateful for. So that's a beautiful way to water that seed of gratitude. A third seed is watering the seed of loving kindness. A lot of times we're not feeling that way because, again, we're focused on ourselves. But when we water that seed of loving kindness, it connects us with other beings. It feels wonderful. The heart feels warm. It opens. We have compassion. And it's a deep practice, and it's a profound practice in Buddhism. There are a lot of ways to do that. How do I practice generating more loving kindness, particularly for people that are difficult? How do I do that, or compassion? There are formal practices in Buddhism that we have. Once a month, here in the hall, we have full moon loving kindness and compassion evening, and the whole evening is about doing loving kindness practice. Dave just led a beautiful evening last week. We have phrases, we have reflections that we do that just really help us open our hearts. So those formal practices are really helpful, and they range from loving kindness and compassion to also just developing an open-heartedness to difficult people, to all the neutral people that we don't even really see them. Not just the people we care for, but when our hearts open that way, our happiness is unlimited. It's not all about what's happening with this one. We're then connected and we care about the happiness, the well-being, the joy of other people. So it's a beautiful practice. So whether it's the monthly full moon, we have a guided meditation channel on YouTube where we have a lot of loving kindness and compassion practices. Pick up any book by Sharon Salzberg. She's wonderful on loving kindness. Google it on the internet. There's so much out there. And then off the cushion, we can practice. Thich Nhat Hanh used to always say, we aspire to practice and vow to act with the eyes and heart of compassion to bring joy to one person in the morning and to ease the pain of one person in the afternoon. He said, we know that the happiness of others is our own happiness. And so that's a practice. You can be very secret about it. No one has to know what you're doing, but just a small little thing you might do for somebody in your household to bring them some joy, to make their life easier. Or maybe you see someone struggling. Sometimes it's just being a better listener, being there for someone. So looking every day for little ways to bring a little bit of joy and happiness into someone else's life. It's these kind of like being a secret Santa back in the old days. But no one has to know, but you feel it in your heart because we naturally are connected. We have this open-hearted awareness that, we're all coming from this same source. And when we connect with someone else in that way, you feel it. It feels like, yeah, this is right. This is who I am. I have found, too, just having a simple mantra can be helpful in this area. When I set my aspirations for this year, it was presence, coming back to that awareness, that openness, and then kindness. And so steeping yourself in maybe your own little mantra, mine is just presence, kindness. And in those moments when someone asks me to do something and I'm feeling kind of like, I remind myself, presence, kindness. And I also think of, if you have somebody who inspires you, who you feel like is a really loving person, to bring that person's face to mind. I am reading the autobiography of Tulku Ujin right now. It's called Blazing Splendor. And oh my God, he was such a profound practitioner of the great perfection and also one of the most kind, loving human beings you'd ever meet. And all the pictures in the book, he has this smile. He has like these Coke bottle glasses and this big smile. And it's just like, I bring his face to mind and think kindness, so that even if that word isn't enough sometimes to pull me out alone, kindness and then his face, it just sort of melts. And we have to do this over and over again because we've spent our life thinking about my needs, what I'm going to do, And if we're going to be different, if we want to open our hearts in loving kindness to other people, and we need to marinate in the thoughts of loving kindness and be inspired by real people who live their lives that way, almost imagining them beside us throughout the day. A seed that, and again, we don't need to be focused on all these seeds at one time. It's kind of a lot. But we may have different aspirations. And so I'm just trying to give you some examples of, for each one of these areas, what are some ways to make it real? And so one area that a lot of us probably need to water is the seed of understanding and patience. Anybody else feel like you need to water a seed? Yeah. I know, I've been watering that one a lot, and still a work in progress on that. But Fred talked about this a lot yesterday. He had a trauma workshop. It was wonderful. And so much of what we learn in Buddhism is the truth of cause and effect. That everything that we're doing, that everybody else is doing, it's kind of rolling along and unfolding due to the causes and conditions in our lives that have brought us to this point. We don't just do things randomly. And so when we get irritated at ourselves or someone else, it's usually because we're thinking, I don't want it to be that way. I don't want myself to be this way. I don't want Maria Teresa to treat me that way. I don't want the world to be this way. I don't want politics. Whatever it is, it's a resistance. Cultivating understanding. Patience is the fruit of understanding, basically. You don't just say, I'm going to be patient. My golly, I'm not going to say anything. It is good to not say anything, obviously, sometimes, but within, we want to cultivate what makes that flower of patience bloom is cultivating understanding of why something's happening. And so we want to water the seeds of understanding causes and conditions. So that when someone's doing something we don't like, instead of reacting habitually in a way that may be angry, we have some understanding of what they're doing. And it doesn't mean that we roll over and play dead or we're a doormat. We still act in life, but we don't have to act from anger. We understand that this person has had a life and they've learned to see things the way they see, to respond based on everything from being a child with their parents, to peers in school, to the values that were stressed to them. And it's different than our own causes and conditions. And so when we cultivate those, we start to understand the world. And Thich Nhat Hanh always said, understanding is love. It is hard to be angry or to hate somebody when you understand they're coming from causes and conditions. And they also, most people don't have the benefit of these teachings of Buddhism, what we call the Dharma. So they're just thinking that this is normal, and they're just, one thing unfolds from another. It's very logical. But they don't see that things could be different. But we see that. So we're the ones, when we see that with other people, compassion naturally arises, and we want to help. And sometimes we can, and oftentimes we can't. But at least our own heart is at peace. So how do we cultivate greater understanding? And there's just a few ways that I think are helpful. One is to practice the art of deep listening. We oftentimes, I don't know, I sound now like my grandmother, but things seem to speed up during life, including our conversations. And, like emails and texting, it's so instantaneous. Someone's barely texted us something and we're writing back. I watch this with my family sometimes, and sometimes it gets into a little bit of friction with people. Instead, we have the ability to just stop and listen with the desire to understand the person, not with the desire to judge them or to fix them, which is oftentimes where our mind goes. Immediately, we're thinking, oh, they need to do this, they need to do that, or I don't do that, or, the mind's got all kinds of funny little things going on when we're listening. So practicing deep listening, we just stop and we drop the thought. And if it comes up again, we just notice, because we have mindfulness light turned on, and we just pay attention. We listen deeply, and they feel heard, and we have an opportunity to understand them more deeply. And if we don't, and they say something that might rile us up a bit, we can stop, we can come back to the breath, and then we can ask them to clarify, but in a kind way. Can you tell me more? When I said this, you became upset, let me understand. We want to understand. So you have to think about that. You've got to want to understand. A lot of times I don't know if we want to understand. We want to be understood. But do we really want to understand? And that is paramount for understanding causes and conditions. We can reflect on cause and effect. If we're sitting on the cushion and there's someone that we're dealing with who's difficult, we can, in the privacy of our own space, we can stop and we can bring this person to mind, and we can think about what would it have been like to be in their shoes for their life. And we have to make stuff up because we oftentimes don't know, but we can imagine, what may have created this person. And again, that can help soften our heart, and we're much more likely to be able to relate and connect with somebody with a softened heart than we are when we're a hard shell that's closed off. The last one I wanted to mention is watering the seed of equanimity. And here we're talking about kind of where we started in meditation, when I invited you to just relax the mind and just let the sound of the rain be received. And also just notice there's thoughts can pass through, sounds can pass through, someone might cough, a thought may come up of this or that, but a mind that's equanimous is sometimes called a Teflon mind, although that's not so healthy anymore, but it's an open mind that nothing's sticking to. And we want to, ultimately in Buddhism, we want to cultivate, actually, I say cultivate, that is our mind. The nature of our mind is open, it's spacious. It's only when the thinking starts to swirl and we grab onto ideas, or an emotion comes up, and instead of letting it just kind of pass through, we're either trying to push it away or we're just building it up and throwing fuel on the fire. We want to cultivate the ability to come back and experience the open mind. And so in that, the one thing I'd say there's a lot of ways to do that and a lot of practices we have. Fred leads a lot of people in that on retreats. But declutter is a big one. When the mind is always full of thoughts, when we're always stimulating the mind, we kind of have grown accustomed to that, right? It's those dopamine hits. Look for another like on Instagram, or see if somebody's responded back to my text yet, or watch another reel. Whatever we're doing, we're constantly looking for stimulation in the mind, and it feels good in the moment. It is creating, I don't know much about the mind, but I'm told these little hits of dopamine that feel good in the moment, but then it's gone and we keep having to have more and more hits. And so the mind of equanimity, it's relaxed, it's open, things can pass through, but we're not overfilling or cluttering the mind. So practice during the day. When you're not focused on something you need to be focused on, like a work project or a conversation, come back and just try to just be. You can either let your attention rest with the breath if you need that anchor, or just let the mind relax and just notice sounds, sights, things that are happening, but without that normal attachment we have. I kind of enjoyed that. It's funny how things pop up in the New York Times every time I'm about to do a Dharma talk. So there was a story a couple of days ago that was really good. You may remember a number of years ago, there was the woman, Marie Kondo had the art of, some kind of miraculous art of tidying up. And she talked about you go into your closet and you throw all your clothes in a pile on the floor, and then you pick it up, and if it doesn't give you joy, you give it away, you toss it, you do something. Well, before there was Marie Kondo, there was, forgive me, I'm probably mispronouncing her name, but Hideko Yamashita. And she was a Zen practitioner. She is a Zen practitioner. And she has practiced and taught people how to declutter through the act of what's called denshari, which is more than, it's not really about this joy. It is, I'll just read what the paper said. She said she encountered this during her university years in Tokyo, where she studied yoga and Buddhist teachings that emphasize letting go of attachments. And she said when sorting through what to keep or toss away, so now she is back in the bedroom again, but she pushes her clients to think about why they are attached to certain items and to examine what overabundance and obsession do to their emotional states. And I just think I know other people have shared this with me too. It's a wonderful practice. Sometimes you're trying to be creative. Maybe you're trying to cook, or maybe you're trying to write or paint or do something else. Oftentimes we find we want to clean our space before we start because we kind of need that decluttered space, that openness. This is the same decluttering of the mind that we need to have wisdom, compassion, creativity come up in our life. So I guess I'm suggesting that if you need to declutter your house, now's always a good time to do that too, but also look at how can I declutter my mind by not putting so much stuff in it, by not feeding it stimuli all the time. And when I find myself engaged in thinking, it's funny, I used to do a lot of hiking with Sierra Club. And even when hiking in the wilderness, we would be talking the whole time. And I realized, I went hiking with Fred early in our relationship, and he just stopped and looked at me and just went like this. And I'd never thought of that. I'm like, isn't that what people do? They talk when they're hiking? But you realize it's so obvious when we stop and look, but we're always filling our minds. So just practice stopping, letting the mind be quiet. It may feel uncomfortable at first. You're used to having that dopamine hit. It may feel a little bit like withdrawal, from some of our stimuli, but try it. I have found that at some point, it's so relaxing, so clear, it feels good. So if you're going to get addicted to something, let's get addicted to that instead of all the stimuli that we put in. So very quickly, before the kids come in, just a couple of practical things I would suggest. This is a lot of information, and the talk will be posted, but just going back to your own, on your own later maybe, going back to your own, I called it a transformation plan, whatever you want, however you want to do this, but I find writing things down helps me because I need to be accountable. Again, it's in the implementation that things fall apart. We have all these good intentions and then we forget. So maybe writing down your aspirations, the few things that were really most important for you right now that are most alive. And then what are some of the qualities that you want to water that support those aspirations? It could be loving kindness or mindfulness or understanding, gratitude, generosity, whatever it is for you. Writing some of those down and then looking at, okay, what are the teachings and practices that I can do to make this happen? This is important. I mean, it gets pretty mundane and absolutely essential at this point. What am I going to do? As Brian said last week, I'm here in the field. What am I going to do now to create the transformation? So maybe for kindness, I'm going to do the formal loving kindness practice. I'm going to try to do one small act of kindness a day, at least to begin. And maybe I'm going to create and repeat and kind of steep in my own mantra of kindness. Maybe with, again, the visualization of someone that for you, it could be your third grade teacher, whoever embodies kindness for you, or mindfulness or understanding. You know, really you need to make this very pervasive in your mind. And that's what you're trying to do with teachings and practices. Steep yourself in it. Don't forget. Make it part of your routine. And then ask yourself, what will change look like? If I'm doing this, how do I know that transformation's starting to happen? So give yourself some benchmarks. I find that I'm kinder to my family. I will be kinder to my family and my coworkers. I'll have less conflict. And if that happens, you'll see it. They'll see it too. This will manifest. My mind more often has a loving, feeling. It's content. There's less irritation. Yep, I hear the little footsteps. And the last thing I just want to mention is that we've really kind of refined our curriculum on the website. So if you go to floridamindfulness.org/MLP, you'll find for the Mindful Living Path now that there are segments for practice. Grounding and nourishing the mind, which we've talked about with an intensive. Opening the heart, where we have a retreat coming up. Emotional healing, we have classes that are being offered all spring. And living an engaged life. And there'll be a self-assessment that helps you kind of wind your way into how can FCM help support me with this transformation. And you can let us know, because that's really why we're here, is to support that. So with that, thank you.
Today, and we have two of our family program participants here that let the Sangha know what we did today. Here's Gemma.
Today we did a tea ceremony, and we did some yoga, and I drew this picture.
That's beautiful.
And I drew this picture.
So we kind of honored the new year with having a apple juice ceremony where we shared apple juice and muffins together, and then the kids got to share things with the group. So it was a good time.
Hey, so we're going to do the meta song, which we do after the kids once a month or so. Probably most people know it. If you don't, it's pretty easy to follow along. It's every verse is the same except who we're addressing it to. So we start with loving kindness. So we start with ourselves, and then other people that are with us, and eventually all living beings, including our enemies, because loving kindness is not about approval. It's about love. So please join in as you feel moved. May I be well, may I be happy, may I be peaceful and at ease. May I have courage, determination, and understanding for all I need. May I be well, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be peaceful and at ease. May you have courage, determination, and understanding for all you need. May you be well, and for my friends and teachers and my whole family, may they always meet with success and overcome their difficulties. May they be well, may they be happy, may they be peaceful and at ease. May they have courage, determination, and understanding for all they need. May they be well, and for all living beings, especially my enemies. May we all be healthy and strong, and may we live in harmony. May we be well, may we be happy, may we be peaceful and at ease. May we have courage, determination, and understanding for all we need. May we be well, may we be
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Family Program. Thank you, Angie, for the talk.